All right, so tonight we're going to talk about real-time applications with Polymer and Firebase. Briefly, why do we want to build real-time applications? I mean, that may be self-obvious. I'll go over a couple reasons. The first big one is the user experience, and not just the user experience, but the user expectations. So it used to be that people would expect that they would go to a website, and if they wanted to see new stuff, they had to click refresh and wait for the website to load again. Those expectations are completely out the window. Now a user expects that if they go to a website and there's new relevant information that's on the page that they're seeing, that's either going to be inserted automatically or it's going to give them some kind of little notification, hey, there's new stuff, click this to go fetch it. The user expectation is just that applications show the current state of what's happening regardless of whether a refresh has happened 5 seconds ago or 5 hours ago. And so that's the reason that everyone thinks about like why you'd want to do real time with your application. But another reason that I've sort of found mostly as I'm trying to work with real time applications is that it actually has a lot of benefits for developer experience, especially on the front end. So a lot of what you do, if you think about it, when you're building front ends, sophisticated front ends, is you're doing a lot of complex AJAX synchronization. You're making a call to add data somewhere and then fetch it back from somewhere else and maybe change it somewhere. And keeping that all in sync can be a really sticky problem, especially depending on the complexity of your data. And what you really want usually is just some kind of persistent object where if I make a change here, it's reflected in the server. If I reload the page, it'll still be reflected in the server. If someone else is looking at the same page, it'll be reflected there. And that's really easy to talk about, but that's really complex to do on the back end because you have to do just data synchronization, notification to all the different connected clients. And there are a lot of libraries out there for Node.js. There's things like Socket.io, there's things like Faye, there's tons of different ways to accomplish real-time in an application. But something that's really been gaining developer mindshare since they launched is a company called Firebase. So Firebase makes real-time real easy. And that's my slogan, not theirs, but I like it. But I mean, basically what Firebase does is it offers you a URL-centric document store that synchronizes JSON in real time using any number of clients. Those clients might be web applications or iOS applications or Android applications, but the point is that when you're using Firebase's SDKs and you change data, that data is automatically reflected back to anyone else who's connected to it without you having to think about or do anything to make that happen. It just works. And that turns out to be a really powerful thing in web applications. So as you make changes to something in Firebase, you're not thinking, okay, well, I made this change and now I need to figure out everyone else who's connected to the page and looking at the same data, and I need to go through and notify each one of them. Instead, the data is the source of truth. So as it changes, everyone is notified. And that goes across the board. And so it makes building these sort of real-time multi-user applications really simple, where it used to be something that was extremely complex. And they offer a JavaScript SDK that is really simple. So you just include their JavaScript, and then you do something like this, where you just say new Firebase to the URL that you specify, and you can just set data and then listen to events as that data changes, and now you know the current state of the data, no matter who's changing it. So Firebase is great, but Firebase plus Polymer, I think, is even greater. So the way that you do Firebase and Polymer together is through something that Google built called Polymer, or that should be Firebase element, apologies, Firebase. So you just, it's on the Polymer's GitHub, it's just bower install save Firebase element. One thing to note is that the Firebase 2.0 JavaScript came out just about a week ago. So right now there's a 2.0 fork of the element that you can install this way, but I assume that pull request is going to get merged any day now. So this is how I built my demos, but it's probably not going to be relevant if you do this even like a week from now. So anyway, just to give some simple demos of how this works, and if anyone wants to access this on their laptop so that they can see stuff happen in real time, because that's kind of when it gets impressive, go to pfb.divshot.io/pound/demos/simple for this one. And this is as simple as it sounds. So right here, we have a user details.
Sorry, what was the URL?
Oh, sorry. We'll go back. pfb.divshot.io /pound/demos/simple. And here we see Firebase in action. So
I'm glad I didn't type anything back.
So this is a real-time application that multiple of us are using at the same time. And the part that's really impressive about this particular demo is it required 0 JavaScript to do. So the source for this is this. So this is condensed a little bit. So all I'm doing here is I am importing the Firebase element. Then I am putting a Firebase element in here. I'm giving it a location. I'm binding the data that comes from it to the data variable. And so this is inside a Polymer element, which we can show. Actually, I don't have it open, but so this would all happen inside a Polymer element where you have all those Polymer template bindings available. And so then I just have simple inputs, and I have their value bound to data.name, data.username, data.admin. Oops. And so basically, without writing any code other than HTML, I have this real-time synchronizing form that will update as anyone changes it across multiple users. And that's a really powerful thing. So how many times is what you're looking for in a multi-user system really just some kind of persistent object? It's not like you need, this complex transactional data handling. You just need some kind of shared object that multiple people can interact with at the same time, and it just more or less works as expected. And with Firebase Element and Polymer, you get that without even having to write JavaScript. Now we'll do a just to show you how easy all this is, I threw all these demos together in less than 2 hours because I have been swamped this week. So I apologize for all the typos. This should be /demo/chat here, and we'll have another demo. And this is chat applications are basically the hello world of anything real time. So we have everyone here.
Just do memes all day. So
And
this is just passing back a JSON file.
Yep, basically. Yeah. So we'll go. This one is like slightly more in depth, and by that I mean I wrote 4 lines of JavaScript for it. So here's the HTML for it. So this is inside the Polymer element. We have Firebase element. This time it's /chat instead of /simple. I add this child events attribute, and that basically says that this is going to be a collection of resources, not just a single object. So it's watching for that and the data updates as new children are added. I say limit to last 30, so that means that it's only going to show the most recent 30 messages that are posted instead of loading infinite amounts of data back to the beginning of time. So let's see if we can actually make that happen and get 30 plus messages up here.
Just do a countdown.
Oh, I didn't make this scroll very well, but eventually. And I also didn't check to make sure this worked beforehand, so this is all live. Oh, but there it goes. It started scrolling up off the top. So with just an attribute, I've automatically limited the history to make sure that we're only loading the most recent stuff. This time, data is stored as messages, and keys is another piece of data that I'm saving. So the way that Firebase works, there's no such construct as an array in Firebase. Instead, everything is a nested object and then the various JSON values. So string or a number or Boolean. And so when you need to iterate through something, in this case, we have the keys for that object, which are returned sequentially so that you can get them in the order that they were posted. There's various more advanced things that you can do to set what's called the priority, which determines how they sort. And just launched with their 2.0, you can actually query by and sort by child values. So if you had things that you wanted to sort by name, you could do that, and so on and so forth. And that was just launched like a week ago. But anyway, so then what I do to show the messages is I do a template repeat for every key in the keys, and then I just display from messages the author and text from that message. And then for the input form, which is this down here, all we have is a normal form that has the Polymer on submit binding to call the send message function, and then we have a username, we have an author and a text value bound there, and then we have a submit button. So then let's look at the JavaScript for this element, which I told you is like 4 lines of JavaScript. So when it initializes, it automatically assigns a random guest ID from 1 to 1,000. It sets the text to blank, and then the send message just prevents the form from submitting. That's normal JavaScript stuff. And then it accesses the Firebase reference and calls the push method, which pushes a new child onto the Firebase reference. So if you haven't done a lot with Polymer, anytime you're inside a method on an element, the this.$ is a convenience access to any elements with IDs. So here I have ID equals ref, which means that I can say this.$.ref, and now I'm accessing that element. So this is actually, yeah.
I think one of the biggest things that people should make sure, if they try to access something, that it isn't in the actual, so if something is template and it appears after you have essentially after
initialization, yeah,
then it's not actual.
So yeah, that's actually a good point. So here I have this template repeat. Another thing that you'll do frequently is a template if, which is basically conditionally showing something. Any IDs in there are not going to be pre-initialized, with the potential of exception of if it rendered the first time. You can't count on it though, because those aren't updated live. So that's a convenience method, but you can always do this.shadowroot.query selector to be able to reach into elements in the current state of the document. The $ is just sort of a handy reference for the things that were already there at initialization. But yes, that is a gotcha that you will hit almost immediately as you start building real applications. So, I mean, that's all there is to it, to building this chat app. And I'm showing you like a fraction of what you can do with Firebase. Like I said, I ended up being very rushed putting these demos together. Fortunately, my co-founder Jake, just today on our blog, posted a really long in-depth article about how to build a Q&A site using Polymer and Firebase. And he's going to walk through a real application that does more than just display chat messages now, to give you a better in-depth view of what's going on. So kicking it over to you, Jake.
All right. Yes, it was very good timing that I got that out the door. How do I get out of this?
Shift Command F.
There we go. All right, if you guys want to head on over to polymer-qa.divshot.io, you can see a live demo of what we're hopefully going to be able to build tonight. It's going to be a question and answer system. It's something we wanted to use at DivShot, so this isn't exactly what we're going to use for our potential DivShot Q&A app, but I wanted to build an example one and make a blog post about it so people have a better idea how to build a complete app with Polymer, because there's not a lot of examples out there yet, and with this, hopefully you guys have a better idea of how to get started, how to put certain user interface elements into their own custom elements, and integrate it with Firebase. So we're going to cover a lot of things tonight. We're going to cover routing, authentication, posting questions, editing questions, posting answers, editing and deleting answers, all this stuff, and hopefully less than 45 minutes. We'll see how it goes. But go here, and you'll need to log in with. Everybody has a GitHub account here, right? You two have a GitHub account. So click the little guy up there on the top right, and click login. All right, so I'm logged in. My username's up there, and then ask a question. And this should all be real time, just like Michael's demo. So when I ask, it should show up on your screen as well. We'll see if anybody else can get in and do it too.
That animated?
I don't think so. I think it just was out of the DOM, just popped in. There you go. So the question list automatically updated, and you can see everybody's little GitHub avatar. So you have a subject and then the question itself, and if you click the question, it'll take you to the question page, and somebody already posted an answer. So it's a pretty neat little app, and a lot of functionality. It's a CRUD app that you might build yourself. All right, so let me see how we're gonna get started. Let me. All I did beforehand is I just made a new folder on my desktop, and the first thing we're gonna do is go to our terminal. And let me make sure my blog post up just in case. I don't want to screw anything up.
It's up.
Yeah, okay. So the first thing we're going to do, if you want to follow along too, you can also look at my blog post at the DivShop blog, but I'll just walk through it right now. The first thing I'm going to do is I'd install the UMN generator. Do you want to talk about that, Michael? Interject
yeah, so,
sometimes.
Sure, I can give back. I'll be the color commentator here.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I talked about this last month, so you can actually see a longer version of this. But basically, Adi Osmani, who's on the Polymer team, is also a core contributor to Yeoman. So the Yeoman Polymer generator basically lets you quickly bootstrap everything you need to build a Polymer app. It's not official, but it's quasi-official because Adi works for Google, and this is how they're building most of their stuff now. So basically, it lets you just generate the skeleton for your application and then generate new custom elements that fit into that application really easily. So if you've ever used Yeoman before, then you know that it uses Grunt as a build system, so it lets you do Grunt serve to display the content, and then you can also build, which uses the Polymer's Vulcanize. So Vulcanize is basically like minification for Polymer. So because Web Components uses these link rel imports instead of using just like script source or something like that, they needed to build a new system. So basically what Vulcanize does is it crawls through your HTML, pulls out all the link imports, concatenates them all into one file, and then dumps that into the project so that you can use that instead of having dozens of round-trip requests as your dependencies get loaded. So,
all right, so we're going to use UMN to actually generate the structure of our app, so we don't have to like tediously create every single folder and figure out how to organize our app. UMN takes a lot of decisions out of that process, and it's really useful. So if you don't have UMN, you want to install it with npm install yo. I already have that done, so I'm not going to do it here. And you also want to install the generator for Polymer, so it'd be npm install g global generator Polymer. I've already done that, and the command you want to run after you do that is just yo Polymer, and that will generate your Polymer app, and it'll ask you a series of questions. So would you like to include core elements? I'm gonna be no, because I'm gonna show you guys how to add the elements yourself. And I'm not sure, I think out of the box it might install 0.4, and for this demo we're gonna use 0.5. So I'm just gonna say no to everything, and it's gonna run through the process, install my node modules and Bower components. And once that's done, we're gonna open it up with Sublime and run the app for the first time. Let's just give it a second.
Oh, and Polymer 0.5 was pushed out yesterday and announced today. So this is literally like as of today new stuff that we've been playing with. Yeah. So hopefully everything will go right, but we haven't had a lot of chance to play with it yet.
All right, so I'm going to open up my app, and I'm also going to run it. And to run the app locally, I'm just going to use grunt, and there's a command already there for me called grunt serve. And that will open up my browser, and if I make changes in my text editor, it's automatically going to refresh, which is really nice. Let me Make sure my console's open. So here's the first app you get when you use Yeoman. It's just a simple Hello World app, and you can change things in the input, and it'll update automatically. But we're going to clean that up and get rid of that stuff. The first thing I'm going to cover is the project structure that Yeoman generates. So you have an app folder right here, and this is where you're going to do most of your work. There's also the node modules, which contains all the grunt modules you use to build and serve the app, and also connect, which is the local server. So inside the app folder, we have our Bower components and a folder for custom elements. And out of the box, they have a few example elements just to show you how things work. And then, folders that you're accustomed to, scripts, styles, whatever. So to clean things up, we're going to first delete these elements because we don't need them. I can't right click in this. Okay. There we go.
So you're deleting everything in Elements?
I'm deleting things, things that I don't need to use because they're just defaults. And I'm also not going to use an elements.html. I'm going to replace that with the file we're going to make in a second called app.html. And since we are using Polymer 0.5, they changed, you no longer use platform.js, you use web components.js.
Yep. So platform.js was the polyfill layer that Polymer provided, but because people got confused by that, they renamed it to web components.js because that's what it is. It's JavaScript for web components. So that's sort of the biggest, you have to change this or everything's going to break with Polymer 0.5 is you need to change platform.js to web components.js/web components.js. So
yeah, we're going to use that instead. And I'm going to install Polymer 0.5 once I add the core and paper elements. But right now, just take my word for it and use this. And then we're going to delete this. We don't need this hero unit. And then we're going to, I'm going to add a font because I don't like to use Helvetica. Google has a new, they had Roboto around for a while on Android, and now they have a new one for material design called Roboto Draft. So we're going to use that. And I'm also going to clean up the main CSS file because I don't need this stuff. And then update the font family. I'm a designer, so I like to make things look pretty, and you'll see me add some of the CSS, but if you don't want to add that, you don't have to. And then I'm going to delete elements.html. My right clicker is not working. Okay.
So by default, when you generate a new element with Polymer:\L, which we'll do in a second, it'll ask you if you want to add it to the elements.html file, which will basically just add an import, append a new import statement into that. If you want to have sort of more fine-grained control or do your own thing, you can just answer no when you run that generator and import it another way, as it appears Jake will be doing.
Yeah, it comes with multiple generators. You have the Polymer, which generates the app itself, and then you have one for creating elements, which I'm not going to use because I kind of like doing my own thing and creating elements from scratch, but there's generators that speed the process and make it require even less code. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new file in here called app.html. And then I'm going to use the following template to define a new Polymer element called QA-app. And remember what Michael said in the intro is that you need to use a hyphen in your element name. Always make sure you have a dash, so QA-app. And that's what I use for most of my elements for this app itself. I use the QA namespace. But that's going to be our first element, is the app. It's the container that holds everything. Inside the app container, we set up the routing, set up the Firebase login element for authentication, and we also set up global. So we do a lot of things that span the entire app. All the major global operations are in app.html. So once I define this in app.html, I want to add it to my index.html. So right here, what I already did is I imported it, elements/app.html, and then inside the body, I'm just going to type QA-app. And so if we refresh, it should refresh automatically. It's completely blank, and webcomponents.js is not there because I have to install first.
Yeah, so just update your bower.json. It's probably the fastest.
I'm just gonna do. It automatically does 0.5, so I can just use the human. So what I'm doing right here is basically what UMN can do for you as well. I'm installing all the paper and core elements that I need. And it also saves to my bower.json file. All right, so
I'm gonna update the Polymer to 051 in there.
good point. I want to make sure I'm using the latest version of Polymer, and then run Bower update. Yes. Okay, so I think everything is good to go. And to be on the safe side, I'm going to restart my server. And then, all right, Polymer's ready to rock. There's no errors. We're good. And our QA app is loaded right there, and there's the shadow DOM. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to do is add full bleed, so there's no padding in my body.
And that's one of the Polymer layout attributes, which is another talk that is on YouTube. Polymer ships with a number of attributes that you can add to any element that let you leverage either common CSS things, like there's a hidden attribute that you can add that just adds a display none. There's full bleed, which if you add to the body gets rid of all the padding and stuff that's default on the body. There's fit, which just does absolute positioning with top left, bottom right, all 0, so it fills the entire container. And then there's a number that are built for building Flexbox layouts, which all the browsers that ship with web components are going to support Flexbox by then. And man, if you haven't used Flexbox, it's amazing to work with for building web layouts. So
I love it.
Yeah,
it's amazing. So when I ran Bower install core elements and paper elements, added a lot of stuff to my Bower components directory. You can see here, here's all the core elements that the Polymer team built, and then here's all the paper elements. And paper is mostly just centered on material design. They're mostly UI elements. And core includes a lot of utility elements like core Ajax and core overlay, core signals, things like that. So now that we have the paper and core elements installed, I'm going to jump back into app.html. And I'm going to, before I get started, I have to import these elements. So at the top, I already imported Polymer. I'm going to copy and paste these elements right here into my app.html. And I'm including core header panel, core toolbar, core icons. These are all UI components I'm going to use to make the header, the menu bar up here. So the first thing I'm going to do is create a core header panel. And the core header panel is basically a UI element that allows you to add a toolbar at the top and then a content container under it. And when you scroll, the menu bar stays fixed at the top. So if we had a bunch of questions in here, like if somebody added a few more, you'd start scrolling with the menu bar that stay at the top. And then I'm also going to use a paper menu button, which is right here, that'll open up a drop down. So I'm just going to copy and paste that. We're not going to write it by hand, not enough time. And I'm going to include that right underneath the style tag inside the template.
So one thing to note is that you're going to have lots of different element files to define all the elements for your application, and you want to make sure that you put the imports for all of the elements that you're using in that at the top of the file. It's not like that's required. The first time a URL is imported, it only gets imported once, so subsequent ones are just a no-op. But you'll find as you build your project that if you don't do that, you're going to like delete a file that you don't need anymore, only to realize it's loading dependencies that you use somewhere else, and so you're going to have everything breaking and you don't know why. So just good code hygiene is to import everything you use in every element file, just to be safe.
All right, so here's the menu bar, and the dropdown doesn't load yet because we have some hidden conditionals in there to check for certain variables that we'll need when we use the Firebase login element. But again, I'm going to make this pretty and copy and paste some CSS. And that's going to go inside the style tag for this element. So anything I want to style right here in the DOM of this template, I'm just going to do it right here in the style. You can also use an external style sheet if you'd like. It's up to you. But for this example, I'm just going to do all inline styling. Once I add that, it's going to be blue and white. And if you take special attention to the CSS, you might notice there's a shadow selector. I'm using this right here because in order to change the background color of the content div inside the core header panel, right now it's a grayish color. I want to make it, I think it's white. I want to change the color regardless. I'll have to pierce in the shadow DOM and edit this div. So if you inspect core header panel, you have to use a selector to style things inside the shadow DOM. So in my selector, I'm styling main container and changing the background color. So there's a few pseudo elements like that you can use in CSS to get to things you normally couldn't, because if I did not include this, it's not going to work. But if I include the shadow pseudo element and change it to red so it's more noticeable, it'll change. So now that we have a basic menu bar, we want to add a way to log into the app and submit questions. So we need to add the Firebase login element. So like Michael said in his presentation, you use bar install save Polymer / Firebase element, and then it just show up in your Bower components directory. It's right there. And after that, you just import it. So link import. And then we want, I think we just need a login element for this page, for this element. And then I'm going to add the Firebase login element right below my style. I think you can add it anywhere in the template, right? It doesn't matter.
Yeah, it should be fine.
Location doesn't matter necessarily, but I usually keep it at the top.
Yeah, by convention, I usually keep any non-display elements at the very top, just sort of the same way that you used to write script in the head of the file. It's just easy to reference everything there, and then you sort of know, here's all the data that's in play for this element.
So in our Firebase login element, we're going to specify some attributes, similar to how Firebase element binds to data. Like there's a data attribute equals data. We're going to use a user variable, and then we're going to specify the location to be, I think it's polymer-QA-wcla.firebaseio.com, and then provider we're going to set to GitHub since we're using GitHub auth, and then we're going to specify some events. So on login we're going to call a function, and then on error, on login error.
So is this basically going to handle the handing it off to GitHub and getting whatever
Right.
session?
Yep.
Really?
Firebase does. So what
Wow.
what he would have done beforehand is
Create
created
a new
a GitHub client application and then just put the client ID and secret into the Firebase configuration, which is on their control panel. But then once you do that, all the auth, it just opens a pop-up window, handles everything.
Mhm.
All you have to do is write the JavaScript.
So yeah, it's really simple. And when I copy and paste this code, I already have some on-click handlers for these links. I have a login and log out, and now that I have the login element set up, I should be able to see login link. So I have a login link set up. I need to write the functions for each of these items. So I'm going to write inside here my login function, and all I'm going to do is call login method. So this cache line based login is just targeting this element right here, and then I just call login, and then for log out, save it, go back, log in, and I'm pretty sure I'm logged in, except right now I don't show the username. So let me add that in real quick, and I'm going to add it underneath paper menu button template. I'm going to use an if conditional. If the user variable is a variable, I'm going to print out user.github.username and that template. And there you go. So, in just like a few lines of code, I can log in and log out of my app. It's really nifty.
Just
How
think
the
about all
web
the
has
code.
evolved.
We made
All
it.
the
This
code
is
you
the
used to
dream.
have
The
to
dream
write.
is
Oh, I
real.
know.
Like on the back end to log, just do a simple login.
I wrote the OmniAuth library for Ruby, so I'm well aware of authentication hell.
Pain in the ass. Just basic
Oh.
authentication.
So now that we can log in and log out, we have an element. We have a QA-app element, but we're going to have many other elements, and we want to be able to share this user data across all those elements. So how do we do that? There's different ways, and on my blog post there's a link to some of the different ways. Like there's core signals for elements to communicate between each other. There's a bunch of things. So we're going to use an element we built ourselves here at DivShot called PVC Globals. So what I'm going to do is install it, just like I install everything else, Bower install, DivShot /PVC Globals, and then hopefully it's compatible with 0.5.
I don't think we're using anything too crazy in there.
All right, so I installed the Bower. It's showing up right here in my Bower components directory, and now I'm just going to import it. And you can kind of expect, you know what the reference is going to be, because most components, they have the actual name of the element as the folder and then as the HTML file. It's standard convention.
And that's also the same convention. So the Yeoman Polymer generator also ships with another one called Polymer:seed, and you use that if you want to generate a reusable element that you're going to publish to Bower or GitHub. So that'll bootstrap the folder structure for a reusable component that you want to publish open source.
So PVC Globals is an element that allows me to set a global variable, obviously, and use it across all my elements. And all I have to do to call that is just PVC Globals, and I'm going to bind it to a variable called Globals. And like what I wrote here is I want to have events, so when I log in, I want to set something. If I have an error, I want to report it. So our functions are onLogin and onLogin error. And I'm going to use this, no, it's just this globals. And I'm going to set the current user to equal the user, which is set from the Firebase login element. And then on login error, I'm just going to report to the console, because we're not going to release this to production just yet. So, looks like I already did it, but I will log out and log in again so you can see the event in action.
Yeah, it ships with live reload, which means that as soon as you make changes to the HTML, it automatically refreshes the page. So that's why everything's happening before we even
Very
go
fast.
look at it.
Okay, so now we have a menu bar with authentication set up. Next, we want to add routing, which is really easy too, using a I don't remember who exactly made it, but you can look it up. It's called app-router, and all I'm going to do, again, just Bower install app-router.
And in my personal experience, app-router is the single most useful Polymer element that was not shipped by Google so far. It's really well done. Everything's worked perfectly that I've tried. And routing is not an easy thing to do in a single page app, so kudos to the author that we don't know. I will look it up on my phone so that I can give him kudos.
Eric Ringsmith.
Eric what?
Ringsmith?
Eric Ringsmith. So thank you, Eric Ringsmith, for building awesome open source.
Yeah, and this project is also built with Polymer, which is a site we made. It's a showcase of all the apps out there that are already built using paper elements and web components in general. So if you want to check that site out, you should. There's me testing out a live chat room built with Polymer. And here's the app router page. Okay, so we imported app router, and now we want to set up our routes. So I'm going to do that inside the content div, part of the core header panel itself, because the views actually show up inside the app router tag. So I just specify app-router, and then I add a new route this way, just app route. Path equals root for my question list. So I try to plan out my elements ahead of time by setting up the routes. And we're only going to add 2 for this demo. The first one is the question list itself, which is the home page you see right here. So that's going to be questions/list.html, and then the element for that's going to be called QA-list. And I'm going to make one more called questions, and then placeholder ID in the elements/questions/view.html. Specify an element for that. So now that that's set up, we need to actually create those files and create new elements. So inside elements, I'm going to add a new folder called questions, and then list.html and view.html. I'm going to start off with list. I'm going to use a definition template that I have for my blog post. Copy and paste that so we don't have to write anything by hand. By default, I'm just going to import the Firebase element itself and then PVC globals. What is your opinion on including Polymer.html on every single page? Every single file?
I do it, but it's questionable. I'd say, like, if you don't do it, you should probably do it like in your, like, either app.html is the first line, or in your in the very first file that you import, period, or in your actual like index.html page for your app. Put that. Otherwise, put it at the top. I mean, I put it at the top of everything because, like I said, just to be safe. If I rename things, delete things, like, I want my app to still work, so I just put it at everything. But yeah, I mean, these things all just work more or less, as they do. So some of the things we're talking about are as, the way that you do it, and other things are just conventions that either we've figured out or other people are figuring out as we learn the best way to build web component stuff.
Yeah, so I don't play it safe. I just include app.html. All right, so now that we have all that imported, we're going to declare our Firebase element finally, and set an ID, location, and then questions for the question collection in Firebase, and then bind the data to questions so we can list them out, and our keys as Michael showed. So there's our Firebase element. And now we're going to use a repeater to traverse all those keys. Again, I'm going to copy and paste some HTML and then explain it. So I'm using a paper shadow tag to add a nice looking shadow around each question right here. And then in my question div, I have a user div. I'm using layout attributes with the flexbox, and my questions links go to the actual questions route, and print out the title, content, username. Pretty straightforward. Let me add some CSS to that to make it look better. Let's see what it looks like right now. Nothing, because we have no questions. All right, 1 second. So certain times throughout this demo, you can actually see things once you have the forms to post them. So I need to set that form right now. I'm going to do some imports. Paper dialog, paper button, paper input. And then add my question form. That's inside a template. Do not want to do that. There we go. So let's update. Oops, I think that's the issue.
Oh. Yeah, because I think the question should be
cut off the
loading
template.
from the demo, right? There's another slash template in there.
No, that goes right here.
Yeah, there's one at the top of the screen too, line 57.
That's the repeater though.
Oh, okay, cool.
Repeater, template, style. I think I'm good.
So you still have to close your tags properly in web components. It doesn't fix that little...
I have a question to ask you. Okay, so almost there. Very close. 1 second.
So something that I've found as I've been building apps, this is a demo app, so we're putting a lot of stuff into individual elements. But sort of the same way when you're building any application, you'll build a method and maybe the method gets a little unwieldy and gets too big, doing too much, so you refactor it into multiple methods. The same thing applies to custom elements. So here, that repeater that we have, where we have sort of a bunch of display logic in there, I'd probably extract that out into its own, like QA list question or something like that, and then just pass the question data into it, and it would like strictly be a display element that creates the UI for the questions. But the great thing is it's really easy to pull out and refactor those things after the fact. So even if you sort of build it all at once, in a single element, you can pull those out really easily later.
And I do some abstraction. Like for the answers, I'm not going to add all the markup for the answers inside the template repeat. In this list.html, I'm going to, or in the view8.html, I'm actually going to create a QA answer element. But that's a good idea. I should have made that into a QA list question element. So for the got question, ask it form, I have a button, and the onClick handler opens a dialog, and you actually specify the dialog inside the button. And my form is inside the dialog tag itself.
Interesting.
And so when I click the paper button to ask the question, submit it, there's a submit question function. So before I can actually show the dialog, I have to write a function for it, for open dialog. It's just going to be similar to what we've been doing. Toggle. So that should open it. Open dialog. Open dialog. I'll edit this out later. There we go. Okay, I think I just had to refresh it. For some reason, it's not live reloading. Okay, so now that I have that, I need to write the handler for this, the ask button, which is going to be submit question. And then I'm going to check to see if title was not filled out. So if it wasn't, please write a title. If the content wasn't filled out, please write some content.
Do you want to return to make sure it doesn't keep going? Or?
Yes, I do. That's in the code. Just ignored it for some reason. And then, if all goes well, if there is a title and content, I'm going to push it using the Firebase element. I'm going to push an object with the title. Content. It's good to use IDs for everything so you can easily reference it in your JavaScript. Then I also have a user object I'm going to attach to every single question so we can show the avatar. And I'm going to actually use the globals variable right here. So I set up a PVC globals element up here, assign it to globals, and then I can reference it down here with this globals. Current user UID. And then username.
So Firebase is a NoSQL store, obviously, and like most NoSQL stores, you sort of have to determine like how you want to handle relational aspects of it. So in this case, we have a user who asked a question, and you could just embed the ID or the URL of that user's Firebase reference, pull that data separately and display it. Then it would always be up to date. On the other hand, it would require an additional pull of data, so it'll take a bit longer. So those are sort of architectural trade-offs that you do making any NoSQL store work, and the same things apply to Firebase.
So I'll set a timestamp, and then once it's pushed, I just clear out the title and the content. So let's give it a test. Reload, refresh, let's get. There we go.
Hooray!
Wow.
If we go, I actually can't log into Firebase anymore. I don't have login information. But if you do jump back into Firebase, you can use Firebase 4 to see your data automatically pushed in real time, and browse it, edit it, do what you like with it.
Yeah, the Firebase just like admin tool is really pretty cool. It shows like everything updates in real time. It'll like turn green as new stuff is added, or orange as it changes, or red as it deletes. So it's a great debug tool to just be able to see. And I think they also launched a Chrome extension that works with DevTools to let you do that right from the bottom of the browser. So I haven't had a chance to play with that yet, but it's pretty new and cool.
So by far the trickiest thing when you build a Firebase app, and it's really easy being able to push all this data. It's like one line of code, boom. But what if you don't want other people to edit that object and save it? You don't want people to like edit your own question.
What if you don't want people to just delete the root of your Firebase and completely wipe out your
destroy
database?
your data? So you need to have security rules in place to make sure that doesn't happen. So it's a good idea to be proactive and test. Once you have a piece of functionality done, make a security rule for it and then test it out. So for questions, we have a read rule right here that says true. So anybody can read the question. Even if you're not logged in, you can read it. That's accounting for all questions. And then for every single individual question, we're going to have a rule in place to make sure that only the owner of that question can write to it. And this right here means you have to, okay, auth doesn't equal null. That makes sure that you're logged in before you can submit a question. And the rule is only for when it's new and non-existing. So there's two things in place right here that you can use. These are, I guess, built-in variables that Firebase provides for you. So data is existing data, and then new data is the actual, once something is pushed, a brand new record is added to Firebase. And there's an exist function we use to check to make sure.
And you apply these security rules in the Firebase admin panel.
Right.
They have extensive guides on how to write this stuff. We're not going to go into nearly everything you can do with it, but basically this is how you make sure that, only the correct read and write permissions happen at any level of the application. So your security rules are going to get complex the more complex your app is.
Yeah, and you should probably also add it to a security.json file in your repo. Don't push it to production like on your server, but just in your repo itself have a security.json file that you can reference and change, and roll back to version control for that, so you keep track of your changes, not just save it in Firebase 4 because it's not track your changes. It just uses the latest version of the file. So now that that's done, we pretty much have a working question list, I believe. We just need to add an event for this little arrow that you can click over there. I'm just going to copy and paste that. There's a view question function that's called onClick, I believe, right here. And it shouldn't be ID. All right. So now if we click this, it's not going to do anything because we don't have the view set up yet.
So he added a handler for the little arrow on the right, but notice he didn't have to for the link because this is all just HTML at the end of the day. So if you have a link and it's got an href and you click on it, the same thing that normally happens with the link is going to happen. So in this case, it would navigate to the hash URL and take care of that. If you're using HTML5 push state, obviously, you have to intercept that because you have to prevent the browser from loading a new page and do push state instead. But it's really cool to realize that this isn't like a replacement for HTML. It's just on top of it. You can do everything that you can normally do with HTML, plus anything that you build on top of it.
So I'm going to copy and paste this element definition in and just explain what we're doing. Importing Firebase element again and defining it right here. I'm going to Polymer QA. And then you can see we have some attributes. We should, yeah, okay. I believe that should be, right. So the ID is pulled inside from app route. We specified a route right here, questions ID, the placeholder right here, so it's automatically binded to the ID variable in our view element.
Yeah, so how that works, whenever App Router recognizes one of your routes, it will instantiate the element that's associated with that, put it as a child of that route, and then any parameters that you specified in your route will be applied as attributes to that element. So you can specify, if you had a, colon user ID, colon, whatever, and then you had those corresponding attributes on your element, those would all be assigned when App Router instantiated it. And like one of the reasons that I was most impressed with App Router, that actually works with query variables as well. So you can do, question mark, sort by equals whatever, and you can have those kinds of complex URL structures, and it just serializes all of that into attributes for you. So it's another reason that App Router is really nice.
So we're hitting the exact question in our Firebase location and then binding it to the question variable. We don't need to use a template repeater because it's just one question. And you can see here I'm accessing the user object that I added when I pushed it right here, as well as the title and the content and everything else. I really need to clean up some code. So let's see if that works now. And the question loads.
How does it get the credentials for Firebase?
It's just public. You just the URL itself is the only thing. As long as the read rules allow you to read it, you could, by default, you can read and write everything to Firebase. You can read from any URL. You can write to any URL without authenticating or anything. Once you set up security rules, you could turn that off. In which case, it would just throw a JavaScript error that says you don't have access to this.
Got it.
But it's all handled just by the Firebase JavaScript.
Okay, so it's open to anyone right now.
Well, I think Jake's applied those security rules that he showed, which means that the questions can be read by anyone, but can only be written to with the rule he specified. So
is it a JavaScript file? Where's the credentials live?
It's a JSON file. It's a JSON specification that you actually set in the Firebase admin panel. So you declare it for your application, and then once you save it, that applies instantly. So if you need to turn off access for whatever reason, you can just put a top level read none or whatever it is, and nobody will be able to access any data from your Firebase. So
got it. Cool.
And you say, with GitHub Authentication, to get the whitelist your domains. So usually in your security rules, you'll be checking to make sure users logged in. Chances are they probably won't be able to push data from somebody made a clone of your app and try to access the location. They wouldn't be able to.
Yeah, I think you can add origin checking to it, so it'll say only allow data to be loaded from
so it's like a CORS
yeah,
kind of thing.
yeah, it's similar to CORS, and I think you can leave it wide open because, for instance, Hacker News is using Firebase as their API. So rather than providing a custom RESTful API, they just have a Firebase that has all of the Hacker News data that's updated live as new stuff is posted to it.
Oh, okay.
So that's sort of an interesting. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that. If I think it's the greatest idea, but it's definitely interesting. So.
Okay, in the blog article, I cover editing and deleting questions. I think we're going to skip that to save some time and go into listing answers and posting answers, and then we'll wrap it up. So for answers, I'm going to create two new files. I'm going to create an answer.html and an answer form.html. So I'm abstracting it a little bit. Instead of showing the answer markup inside the template repeat in view.html, I'm going to make an element for that. And then answer form.html. So I'm going to start off with answer, and I think I'm going to write a template repeater right here. And you might be wondering why I'm using a keys function. And that's because right now the template repeater can only traverse an array, and question.answers is a collection. It's an object. And so I need to get the keys with the custom function. So I'm going to specify another element, QA answer, and I'm going to pass some attributes to that. It's similar to what Michael was saying if you abstracted out the QA list question into its own element. So I'm going to send over the ID, the ID of the answer itself, and also the question ID, so I can access it through Firebase in this QA answer element. So now I'm going to define that inside answer. I'm going to get the HTML for that. Let's view the answers. Okay. I can't forget to import it either. So up here, I define a QA-answer, and then I have attributes that I used in view.html right here. I also have to make sure I define or import it up here so I can use it. I'm just going to use answer.html. Update my Firebase location. And in the location, you can see I used attributes right here. So question ID and then the answer ID. And then I bind it to the answer variable to display the answer. But like questions, we also have to have the form available so we can post. So I'm also going to create that. And then make sure I import it inside view.html. So now we have a way to list the QA answers. Now we need a way to post it and show the form inside view.html. So I'm going to write that element out. And then I don't want to always show it. I only want to show that the user is actually logged in. So even if I was logged out, this answer form should still display. So there's my answer form. If I logged out, it's still there. I want to hide that if I'm not logged in. So I'm going to use a div, and I'm going to use the hidden with this special operator, and then do globals current user. But that will hide it if the user's logged in, so I gotta add an exclamation point to the front, and then make sure I'm using quotes. So that should hide it if I'm not logged in. Okay, and then when I log in, it's displayed. So now that showing, I'm gonna jump back into my answer form definition and look at what I'm doing. I'm using a paper autogrow text area, so the text area expands when I type more, but it's not in this circumstance because I think I need to include, import it. One second. Okay, so I will import it up here. Okay, it's under paper input. And then I think that should be good. Yeah, okay. So automatically expands as you type. And then I have a submit on click handler right here. And so when I submit the answer, I'm doing something similar to what I was doing when I had to push a new question. Reference the Firebase element, use the push method, and then attach a user object and timestamp. along with the answer content itself. That's all there is to it. If you inspect it, all the markup from answer.html should be in there. QA answer, and then inside the shadow DOM, inside our template tag, you have the answer div. Author div using layout attributes, the flexbox, and all that. My blog article goes into more depth and it covers editing and deleting. So I should be able to, actually don't have any security rules set up for this demo Firebase, but if we didn't, say if I was not this user, these wouldn't show up, these would be hidden. But if I was being sneaky, I could jump into the DOM and turn off that hidden attribute so it would show up and try to save the answer. And if I didn't have security rules, it could be overwritten.
And I mean, that's always sort of been the catch with anything, like with anything that you can do from the front end, your users can also do from the front end without your permission. So that's always been the catch-22 of building JavaScript applications, is that you can't trust any code that executes in the browser, which means that you have to have some external source of trust or confirmation to make sure that things aren't getting wrecked. And so that's what the security rules do for Firebase. Yeah.
So yeah, that was how to build a complete app with Polymer and Firebase. And hopefully, I think I'm going to write another blog post about covering upvoting, selecting, the right answer, kind of like Stack Overflow. And also, like, right now we don't have any sorting in place for the question list. So if a question was updated, it wouldn't be bumped to the top. It's not sorted by the timestamp yet. So there's still a lot of stuff that I need to talk about and finish up my app before it's ready for production.
Is this something DivShot's going to be doing, like creating like a directory of apps that people can install?
That'd be awesome. Maybe.
I mean, what we're mostly doing with, like, why we're doing so much stuff with Polymer and with web components is we honestly believe this is how front ends will be done in 2-3 years from now, because our entire purpose as a company is to help developers do front end development better and deploy it easily. We think it's very important to know what's coming and to be on top of it. That's why we started this meetup. And
just looking at this, I mean, like being a web developer for 15 years or 10 years, it's just like, where was this when I was still doing it?
These are normal object-oriented concepts that we're just barely starting to adopt.
Yeah.
Right.
This makes me want to be a webmaster again.
Yeah, so thanks, Jake, for walking through.
Yeah, great job.
That was good.